They gave us a list of what it was that your positions were going to be.
Wait,
what your prompts were going to be.
Wait, when?
I think it's sneaky to have like a coordination like that. This group who was doing this debate on this thing, right? A lot of them really knew each other pretty good, and they had group chats and things like this, right? And they coordinated, like they coordinated pretty closely on some of these attacks and the way that they were going to do the attacks. And so, if you have the benefit of having the topics up front, which everybody involved does, you can kind of do some coordinating, right? And so I think that if you have that many people who are kind of coordinating, right? They're kind of coordinating against a single person. I think that's cheating. I think that because that's not really anymore the idea of 1v20, right? 20 individuals with their own kind of individual takes and their own individual thoughts and their own individual. Instead, it becomes a coordinated gotcha strategy, right? It becomes a coordinated gotcha strategy. I wanted to, because we were on the Jubilee. I was watching it this morning, the release episode, and I don't know what your takes are on that, but that was not a place which was really conducive for debate. It was basically a place that's conducive for shouting matches. So I kind of went through your take on this. And I'm actually still confused because I think it's important when you're debating with people, and I kind of bank on this, that I understand their worldview, or else there's no real way for me to even engage with what they're saying. So I was hoping we could just revisit that conversation and we could just chat about it. I'm not here to debate, bro, none of that. I just actually kind of genuinely want to understand the position.
Yeah, sure. What's the...
Well, so this was maybe like 2 years ago. Maybe 3. You were on a panel with Vosh. I don't know if you remember this conversation. I think it was on.
Yeah, you're going to bring up the one about him calling Scalia a fascist, I think, and Bush a fascist, right? Yeah.
Yep. And you kind of you went off on him about it, and you were saying, "Hey, look, this basically," and I'm paraphrasing, right? I don't remember the conversation verbatim, but it was something like, everybody on the left calls everybody on the right a fascist and a Nazi and a this and a that, and like you basically kind of went off on him by asking him to just kind of define what a fascist even is, and he really wasn't able to. And so, I just wanted you to elaborate, because Trump being a fascist, he's a lot of things. I understand your rationale for most of the things you call Trump. I can at least understand it, if that makes sense. I can understand how you got there, but not the fascist thing. That I can't. That I don't understand.
Sure. So I mean, here's one thing I will say at the start. I feel like fascism is a very normatively loaded word, such that when people hear it, it just means kind of bad.
I agree.
Yeah, so there's that. But I think that one of the reasons why I got mad at Vosh in that conversation about calling Scalia or Bush a fascist is because if you call everybody a fascist, you can't really use the word anymore. It loses its power, which is where I'm at now, obviously, because if I call anybody a fascist, it's leftists have been calling everybody fascist for all the time or whatever. So it's like, okay, well, now it sounds like I'm
right.
Doing that.
So you're kind of in the same boat, right?
Well, I don't think Scalia or Bush were fascists, but when I think of fascist, the two prongs that I'm usually thinking of are the ultra-nationalist part and then the authoritarian part. And I view both of these things as being like hyper-exaggerated aspects or elements of populism. We can go into either peg of that if you want. Yeah.
Yeah, well, to kind of start with, I'm just wondering, and we had kind of touched on this a little bit at Jubilee, but have you talked to any of the third? Well, you have. You've debated with a couple of third positionists, I know. Politically Provoked set some up for you with, what was his name? I
don't remember, but I've talked to third positionists before, yeah.
Yeah, you've talked to third positionists before. So, I mean, you have a pretty good grounding of what, I mean, these guys are like embedded in the ideology of fascism. Like they know it inside and out. Keith Woods, all those guys know. Have you kind of dove into any of that at all?
Not really. Not what they say in particular, no.
Yeah. So when they're saying fascism, they're talking about corporatism, which is the idea that the body of the state is made up of corporate entities, and that those corporate entities are there on behalf of the state and move on behalf of the state as the body of the state. And that's that. So that's what they mean when they say fascism. They're looking at what Mussolini and Franco's Spain meant by fascism. So I understand you might have your own definition, but maybe that's what I'm kind of trying to dive into a little bit.
I mean, like, that might be the case. I think maybe historically in the first parts of, like, when fascism was kind of a thing, I think that's how it was understood, right? Like, I think, I could be making this up, but wasn't the term privatization invented for, like, Hitler, like, privatizing and then deploying, like, corporate entities in Nazi Germany or whatever for the state?
I'm not sure if that's where the term privatization came from, but I do know for sure that what fascism was, because they were all the guys who invented fascism came out of communist theory, and communism wasn't working for Italy, and fascism was actually a response to communism. And so that's the idea, was to stop large trade syndicates from swallowing up small trade syndicates, essentially. That's what now that's an oversimplification, but that's kind of what fascist theory and third positionism is. But you just kind of mean something totally different by it, it sounds like.
I mean, like I said, those are the two pegs that I judge it on. Historically, it might have had a different definition. That's totally possible. I mean, if somebody wants to fight me on the definition of fascism, I would probably just immediately concede, because that's not the most interesting part to me. Kind of like how, like, if I'm debating somebody who wants to argue about communism, depending on how obstinate I'm being, I'm not going to start screaming at the person, well, actually, communism implies a paperless, stateless society, so you're totally wrong. Because when they say communism, usually they just mean it's like really huge overreach of government and maybe like high taxes or whatever, you know. So I just
You mean like the conservative spurgs who are like everybody's a communist and everything's a communist. If the government's involved at all, it's communist. like that type of thing.
So I probably I would just argue with people about, okay, well, what are you arguing? Like, is the government expansion bad or whatever? But it depends on the style of the conversation, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you say, okay, so I think we're getting some clarification here. So you mean when you say fascism, your meaning is a historical standard which applies to authoritarianism and protectionism, right? Is that correct? Kind of correct?
Yeah, kind of. Protectionism being like one of the legs of the hyper, or the hyper ultranationalism or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, how would you then? Because like a guy like Vosh would agree with this. He would agree that these are at least legs of fascism. And I think I would even agree that this could be considered a leg of fascism. If you're saying there's multiple pillars that hold up a fascist system, I think that authoritarianism and protectionism could easily be kind of related into two of those legs. But then how would you kind of push back against a guy like Vosh when he's calling basically all right-wingers fascists, because they do want a degree of authoritarianism. I think leftists do too, to a degree. And they do want to have some type of protectionism, at least tariffs. They seem to be for that and this type of thing. But I mean, isn't that exactly kind of what you were going off on him about, though, right?
I mean, like, the reality is every single thing in life exists on a spectrum. Whether you're talking about like, well, maybe not everything. I guess if somebody's dead, they're not. But like, you know, if we're talking about like mental illness, like how
maybe death's a spectrum.
Sure.
I don't know. But anyway, go ahead.
Like what is a democracy? Like, a lot of people right now will argue, I don't know if you say this or not, I'm trying to like start an argument on this, but some people will say like, oh, America's not a democracy because we don't like directly vote on every single thing. It's like, okay, well, that's not really true. But or like, is a particular thing like authoritarian? Like, authoritarianism exists on a spectrum. You know, if you were to go to the wandering tribes of the Middle East prior to the establishment of any states, like, to them, every single government is going to be authoritarian because these people have ultimate freedom to do whatever they want, and anybody telling them you can or can't do anything is going to feel authoritarian, right? So, I mean, it all exists on a spectrum. So, I guess when I'm, as an American citizen with an American tradition and history, when I talk about authoritarianism, my perspective is probably going to be compared to what I think the intention and the ordinary operation of the U.S. system is. I would say that Trump is an authoritarian, is what I would say.
Yeah, so I can understand the idea of how you got to authoritarianism with the separate slate of electors, this type of thing. I get that. Like, I can understand the rationale. But in this, I largely agree with you. If you're saying kind of everything's on a spectrum, I can say the same thing about Christianity, right? There's Christian ethics. There's lots of people who follow various forms of Christian ethics, but I wouldn't call them Christians. And I don't think that they would even self-identify as being Christians because they wouldn't fit the other criteria which are necessary. And so I guess in this, when you're talking about fascism, if you say, well, these are two legs of fascism, I think I could even agree that that's true. I guess the only thing that I would want some clarity on is like, you wouldn't say Trump is a fascist, though. Like, just like I wouldn't say you are a Christian because you follow some forms of Christian ethics, right? There would be other criteria there.
I mean, I guess it depends on where it's. I mean, I feel like at this point it's a big semantic conversation. Not that semantics are bad or not important.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Semantics are essential, but it's like whatever this like narrowing of the conversation would be a thing that I'm not as interested in. If it was like, what is the historical tradition and definition of fascism, and would XYZ leader qualify for it? That's just a conversation I'm not generally having. But if generally when I say Trump is a fascist, and then I say Trump, I believe that he exhibits characteristics that are hyper-nationalist and ultra-authoritarian, what I'm really saying when I say Trump is fascist is I'm emoting Donald Trump has tendencies that are far more authoritarian than what I think the U.S. system was or should be designed for, and Donald Trump has ultra-nationalist tendencies that go further and beyond what a free liberal capitalist society should be designing for, is really what I'm saying, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think I understand all that too, but to kind of narrow in on this, right? And I'm not trying to be overly semantic at all,
Sure.
to be honest with you.
When I say semantic, I just mean defining words. I don't think like arguing semantics is not necessarily bad. It's it's essential.
No, it's good. It's good for a conversation. The thing is that here's my disconnect. You and I both know that the word fascist is a super loaded term now, right? Politically, it's a loaded term that leftists essentially, or left-wingers, progressives, liberals, Democrats, whatever kind of group you want to associate, use this as a way to attack their opposition, and they're basically calling them Nazis, right? That's basically what they're saying. Is when they say fascist, they're using it as a kind of intermediate to say you're a Nazi. So when you say, what I'm trying to get clarified is when you say Trump is a fascist, right? You're kind of bringing all of that loaded terminology up into bear when it may not actually apply. And I guess that's why that particular position that you had, it's the other ones are all rational. Like all the positions you had at Jubilee, I thought were totally rational. They made sense from your worldview. That one doesn't seem that rational, though. That seems like you're just kind of using like rhetorically loaded language because it's super effective, right?
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. The issue just comes to what do you want to fight over and what do you want to give up? Because, I mean, we all know this in this space, that like technically every word and every definition and every thing is so beyond like warped and stretched. There were some things that were there was at least one thing that was part of the Green New Deal that was genuinely socialist. Nobody talks about this because everything was socialist. But if I'm not mistaken, in part of the Green New Deal, Bernie Sanders and AOC, I think they worked together on authoring this, or maybe just AOC, I don't remember. Part of the plan was to expropriate 20% of every single U.S. corporation and turn it over to the employees of those corporations. That's an actual socialist policy. That's not.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, that's not just like a more government redistribution, higher taxes. That's like an actual socialist policy. And I would say that as such. I would say this is an actual socialist policy. I don't know how I feel about this, but like if I say that, I know that now I'm going to have to fight through the definitions of everything. But the issue is just I don't like just giving up every single word, because it's like, well, I can't talk about, fascism, I can't talk about socialism, I can't talk about toxic masculinity or feminism or whatever the you're going to say, because everybody's like destroyed the meanings of these words because they've used them so much. So I guess like in my dream scenario, I call Trump a fascist. Somebody says, what do you mean by fascist? And then I say, these are the two legs of fascism. And then we argue over whether or not Trump qualifies for that. But I don't know. There could maybe be a better way to approach it, but I don't know.
Okay. Well,
there's a bunch of normative baggage that gets dragged in. Although some of that is intentional too. Like I think that fascism is bad. Much the same that if I call somebody a socialist or communist or tanky, I also think that's bad, and I'm trying to signal that too. So maybe.
But when you were in that Vosh debate, you made a good point that, and you've made it before, and I make it all the time as well, which is that, look, even the bad guys sometimes do good things, right? So just saying, hey, this is a fascist policy or this or that doesn't even necessarily make it a bad policy any more than there's probably some socialist policies that you might be able to get behind, or that type of thing. Just because bad guys also did thing doesn't mean thing bad. kind of on its face. So
maybe I
guess
I would even go a step further, and I would say that there are very few forms of economic or political organization that have like a normative value. There are probably some, like I might maybe actually I don't know if I would say any, because my example I was going to say maybe slavery is always bad, but I don't know if that's true if we're talking about like, let's say that in the United States, let's say that if you go to jail, let's say that you can get out early if you agree to do 20 hours of community service. Like, does that count as slavery? Like, I don't know, maybe.
Well, there's other forms of that too. Like, for instance, if you're in a war with another nation and your option is to either take out the civilian population or enslave them, would it be more optimal to enslave them? That way they weren't at your back. There's all sorts of ways I think we could make moral justifications for these things, right?
Sure, yeah. So I try to, it's impossible and it's completely futile, but I try to tell people to divorce, like don't think about economics or governments like normatively. But you can fight, or rather, you can get normative value to them, but you have to like build it up. You can't just say it offhand. Like there are democracies that have been worse than some authoritarian regimes. There have been republics that have been worse than monarchies. Like there's a lot of other stuff going on there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I can actually agree essentially with all this. So maybe I guess now that we're kind of on the same page, so if Trump does have these said kind of like fascist style policies from your worldview, I mean, do you think that those are always bad? Like protectionist and tariffs, for instance. You don't think all tariffs are bad? Biden has some, right? And that's a form of protectionism. So there's some kind of threshold there, obviously, for when too much is too much, right?
Yeah, so so we have to get into the weeds on like econ stuff, but the issue that I have when it comes to tariffs is that tariffs, when they're used, they do particular things and they don't do other things, and people aren't always honest about the things that they do and the things that they can't do. So then they lie about when they're putting tariffs on. So for instance, if somebody were to tell me we need to put tariffs on China when it comes to manufacturing microprocessors, because if we went to war with China, we're going to be fucked if they like pull the plug on all that. So if you want to say we should tariff to protect that industry, what you're saying is we need to have a tariff for national security purposes. Okay? Now, that's a fine argument, and I agree with that argument. I think that's good. There probably are some things that we should manufacture at home in the event of war. However, if you try to pair that with saying, well, this is all going to be economically good at the same time, well, hold on. That's probably not true. If you're doing these tariffs for national security reasons, they're probably not also going to be economically beneficial. So you have to be honest about what we're doing. I don't think all protectionism is bad, but there's a macro theory of why you're protecting industry that can make me disagree with all of your tariffs, even if some of the tariffs are good. Like if you're,
Okay, I understand what you're saying. But kind of on this is kind of moving against the view then, I think, a little bit. So what you're saying is like, yeah, of course there's times where protectionism is totally appropriate, totally fine. In this case, you could have some foreign adversary who you might potentially have war with, and so you want to make sure that they're not making the very components which are going to go in the weapons that you're going to use to defeat them, let's say. So yeah, absolutely. But on the other hand, that could give us kind of a little bit of economic downturn. Fair enough. I can agree with that too. But the thing is like, so if Trump's idea here is to put these types of tariffs on, and you don't agree with them because you think there's going to be an economic downturn, or perhaps you don't even agree that the people he's putting them on are potential enemies, that doesn't seem still to me to be particularly authoritarian, right? That just kind of seems like maybe you would think he was just a bumbling idiot, right? Not so much like a fascist authoritarian.
Yeah, sure. So to be clear, so two things. So one, nothing about the tariffs are technically authoritarian unless he tries to do all of it via executive order, that could be arguably authoritarian. These would fall under the ultra-nationalist part. The reason why I oppose Trump and his tariffs is because, are you familiar with the term autarky?
Yeah.
Yeah. The idea seems to be that a good country is a country that has in-housed all of its supply chains. And I think that for a whole bunch of economic reasons, that's really dumb. Or I shouldn't say dumb. I just don't think that's possible. And I think it hurts your economy overall. And I think that all of Donald Trump's tariffs are built around this concept of autarky. So even if he does tariff some things, and I would agree with why he's tariffing a thing, I wouldn't agree with any of the tariffs, because I would say, well, the place that these tariffs are coming from it's not like a theory that I would agree with. Even if you might do something, I think, oh, this probably could be beneficial though in the long run or whatever.
Okay, yeah. So I think I understand that, and that's rational. That's rational to me. The reasoning behind it makes sense, whether I agree with it or disagree with it. It totally makes sense. But then with the idea, though, of the two pillars that you're using here to call him a fascist, the tariffs and protectionism that you're pointing to, then doesn't seem like that would stand as one of those pillars, because it doesn't seem like he's doing it from a position of some kind of authoritarianism or even a consolidation of power, but just maybe perhaps from your view because he's a bumbling idiot and doesn't understand economics, right?
Well, no, the authoritarian stuff is going to come from the centralization of power into the presidency. These would be on the, like I said, these would be on the nationalist side. Like, there are going to be some policies that you take that might be nationalist or ultra-nationalist, and then there are going to be some things that you might take that would be authoritarian, but not necessarily like nationalist.
Well, let me make sure I got it right. The two pillars again. The first pillar is authoritarianism,
and then the other one is hyper nationalism. So, like, here's an example.
Yeah.
You might argue that you're kind of familiar with DACA, right?
Yeah.
I think you could argue that DACA is a type of authoritarianism, right? Where the executive, Donald Trump, is using with wide discretion some immigration measures that are given to the president. I think it's called TPS, maybe Temporary Protective Service, in order to basically legalize a form of immigration that he couldn't legalize from the Congress. We could say that that might be a kind of authoritarianism. You're grabbing more power for the executive branch. But is that a form of nationalism, to be using the authoritarianism to get more like immigrants protected in the country? Probably not. So that would be like a form of authoritarianism that's not really a form of like nationalism or hyper-nationalism, right?
Well, wouldn't the form of nationalism just be based around kind of the idea that the person is doing something which puts the nation above all other nations, right? Something akin to this?
I mean, you could say that, but I feel like at that point we're broadening the definition so much that you could make anything into anything, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think that's fair. So maybe
nationalism usually implies some form of like native protection, native being non-immigrant, and usually some shared ethnic character. Not necessarily racial, but some shared ethnic character.
Yeah, like cultural nationalism, the idea that we have one language and some type of cultural cohesion, this kind of thing doesn't necessarily have to include race, but there has to be some kind of criteria which is shared amongst the group.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's fine. But I mean, Democrats have also done this. I mean, and they do it all the time when it comes to immigration acts and things like this, where you definitely want to. They definitely seem to still want to select from countries which have a greater base of educated immigrants if they can, right? So I'm not even sure if that would meet this criteria for the second leg necessarily.
So I'm not opposed to the concept of nationalism. Or being like patriotic or doing things that are in the benefit of your nation. I think all of those things are fine. It's this concept of extreme hyper-nationalism, this concept of it's not just enough for us to be good or the best, but we might even start doing that to the large detriment or expense of other people because we are like better than those people and we don't even need those people. And it's this like island concept, basically, the autarky thing is what I'm harkening back to a lot. And I feel like, I mean, even Republicans before Trump didn't really venture off into that direction much.
No, not really. I mean, when you're talking about ultra nationalism, I think I have the same kind of general idea. That you're putting America first. You're talking about things like American exceptionalism. You're talking about how you're going to put, your people before any other peoples, on planet Earth. I'm not sure though how that's bad exactly, but or even necessarily fascist. Like, so I mean, Japan does this, right? They tailor all policies, except they do have a racial element, right? But they tailor all policies to the interest of the Japanese over all of the groups. I would say that's ultra nationalist, but it definitely doesn't seem like it's a fascist nation to me, or they even have fascist leaders.
Definitionally, weren't they fascists like in World War II? They're not now anymore, right? Probably not.
Well, they were imperialists.
Wasn't an imperialist fascist country though? Like
no, they weren't really. Again, so this is where we get into the kind of semantics that I'm trying to avoid, so it doesn't get too pedantic. Right?
Okay, I'll ditch fascist then, because but they believe like in the racial superiority of the Japanese ethnic group over every other like Asian population, like in the when they were doing like the Sino-Japanese War and everything, right? Like that was
for sure. For sure.
Sorry, okay, that's what I mean when I say so maybe not fascist in the World War II definition of such, but okay.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean,
Japan-
yeah, most definitely. I don't think they are now, though, but they still have those policies in place.
Yeah, they might. I'm only saying they might, not because I disagree, but I don't know. But they might. But even if they do, I don't care.
Well, they
I
basically
don't,
just don't take in immigrants. So the
Sure.
Japanese, like the Japanese idea is to keep Japan Japanese.
Yeah. I don't like,
so-
but I don't like Japanese stuff. Like I'm not a Japanese person. I'm an American person, and I have a different set of values for my country.
No, I agree. I agree with that. I'm just, I guess the only reason I'm drawing the parallel is because I don't think that even if they're ultra nationalist by the sense that you're talking about here with these two legs of fascism, that we would call them fascists. I think that would be very difficult to do.
That's probably true. But remember back to the beginning of the conversation, when I say fascist and I define this as like ultra-nationalist and authoritarian, I'm saying with respect to where like American democratic liberal capitalist values are at. So like there might be things that Japan does that are like arguably our good friend state Israel, right, has like immigration policies that work for Israel, and I would say could be justified for Israel. But if we would do the same thing in the U.S., I'd say, hold on, this is not good. That we shouldn't be doing these types of policies. I can understand why this country might do it for different reasons. Maybe Japan has good reasons. I would say probably Israel has like decent reasons, but I don't know if the U.S. would have like the same type of justification.
So then it really does come down to if you had other nations who had the exact same policies, they're not fascist policies. But if our nation introduced those policies, they would be fascist policies because they're against what you consider the spirit of Americanism to be.
Yeah, like
so it's not really a defined concept then, or a hard concept. It's just basically like not what you consider non-American idealism or not in the spirit of American idealism is fascism.
Well, I mean, like the thing is I feel like every kind of political concept is rooted in the history of the country, right? Like if I were to be an American Christian and I were to go to the strictest places in Afghanistan, which is all of Afghanistan now, and I would say, wow, women wearing burqas, this is disgusting. Women shouldn't be forced to cover up like this. Like that's gross. And then that very same Christian could go to, I don't know if in New York it's legal to walk around topless. In New York, she might say, this is fucking disgusting. Like, I have children here. Why aren't these women covering up, right? Is she like a hypocrite because she wants like women to look one way in one country and in another country she thinks they've gone too far?
No, that would be the idea of cultural pluralism or ethical pluralism. I think that everybody engages in that. So I'm just kind of willing to bite the bullet on cultural pluralism or ethical pluralism.
Wait, can you? When you say that, what does that mean? I don't know what you mean when you say that.
I'll give you an idea of this. So, in Christianity, we follow the Ten Commandments, right?
You should, yeah.
Yeah, we should. Okay, so one of the Ten Commandments is honor thy mother and father. You agree? Okay, so one of the ways that you would honor them if you were in Japan would be to take your shoes off when you went in the door, but not in the United States. So is it dishonorable for you to not take your shoes off because other Christians take their shoes off? The answer is no. So the idea here is it's ethical pluralism. The idea is that the culture is going to inform some of the idea, and what we're trying to do is get to the principle rather than the legalism of the idea. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would probably 1,000,000,000% agree with that. That's why, and I'm sure you figure this out in debating people and hearing their like concepts or their theories or their values or whatever, it doesn't actually mean anything until they give you an example. Because it's once you get examples, you realize, okay, when you say that you think that families should be free to make what they think are the right decisions, to one group of people, that might mean I should be able to deny my child to get blood transfusions because I think that this is an evil. And for another group of people, it might be I want my 7-year-old to have hormone replacement therapy because I think they're trans, right? So both these people could have the same, theoretically, a similar sounding set of principles, but until you hear the examples, you really have no idea what they're talking about. So
yeah, well, and the idea is to adhere to the principle. So it's the same in Christianity or almost all ethics. Even utilitarians, I think, would agree. Okay, we have a principle, but there's more than one way to get to the idea of the principle, and so there's more than one way to walk down the path, essentially, for this kind of ethical view, because human beings are infinitely complex, and there's many different ways to honor thy mother and father. My neighbor's going to do it a different way than I do it. It doesn't mean that they're wrong. So that moves into like the pluralistic aspect of cultural pluralism or this type of thing. Christianity is always embrace this. I'm sure when you were in Catholic school, something similar to this was explained. But again, when we're talking about this, if I am to say what a Christian was, like let's say we said it's somebody who says Jesus Christ is their Lord and Savior, right? Something really broad like this. That's still pretty definitive criteria for what we mean when we're saying Christian. And so we know what to rule out of that. That's like a whole lot of people we get to rule out immediately. I think that kind of where your analogy fails here is, yeah, I think that if they go and they see a burqa and say that's disgusting, but then, oh, hey, you have to cover your boobs up, they're still adhering to the same principle. And so in this kind of idea of fascism, I think they're still adhering to the same principle that you find disgusting. It's just that you kind of just say, well, it's just kind of basically based around the cultural aspect, the cultural pluralism of the adherence to the principle. Americans find it disgusting, so I don't like it. But for another culture, fascism might be okay, right?
Yeah, I think I largely would agree with that. Yeah, but I think that I think you could apply this down the road to anything. Like for instance, if you were to ask me, like, are sweatshops okay? I would have to ask in what context. In the United States, I would think that sweatshops would be disgusting. But in like a community where every single family was engaged in subsistence farming and a flood meant that half the population was going to starve and die, I might say, okay, well, sweatshops is a huge upgrade to these people's standard of living. It's actually way better. I think that I don't know if I would view like fascism or like modes of government as these like defined, fundamental, like axiomatic things. I think that you get like a whole bunch of statements and values from them, but then you have to plug in a whole bunch of other concepts that are more relative, basically, right? So like a liberal might say, like a capital L liberal might say, like, oh, like freedom of the press is really important. And then somebody else might say, like, oh yeah, we have great freedom of the press here. You can say things to your family members and the government won't even come and murder you for it. And it's like, okay, wait, do you have like newspapers or anything like that? Like, no, all the media state ran. But I'm saying like, you're never going to be executed for saying something to your neighbor. And I'm like, okay, well, so you might have like the same value system there, but then you have to plug in, I think, like what ultimately end up being, I mean, I would argue, obviously as a atheist, hedonistic atheist, whatever, I would argue that that all of these things are relative to the cultures that they exist in.
Yeah, well, I understand the cultural relativism aspect. Again, that's rational and it's reasonable to me. But if you say like democracy, right? When you tell people, okay, this country's a democracy, you're clearly talking about a very crystal clear criteria, right? There's not that much movement which is allowed in there. It's like that means that the people are participating in the form of whatever type of government or law that they want. The people are choosing that by some methodology, usually voting. I think that almost everybody would largely agree to this. And so I think you would agree to it too. And so if I said this isn't a democracy, you know exactly what I'm saying, what I'm talking about instantly. You know that I'm talking about people not having any ability to participate in their form of government, essentially.
But
with fascism, I feel like that's kind of we're not there with this, right? This is kind of a different thing you're talking about.
So I feel like with that democracy thing, I actually would super disagree with that. I think that when we say democracy, I don't know if there's an agreement on what that means or what that is. I would look to like reading through a lot now of the Federalist Papers, I can see that there were so many arguments made for different parts of the government or how they should function or what's too much or what's not enough or what's an appropriate check and balance or should the people be voting or should electors be voting for president or
hang on real quick, Destiny. What the are you doing? Just so I know. I don't know what you're doing. Most people are asking, they're like, what is he doing? I'm like, I don't know. I'll ask
I have a studio that I shoot all my podcasts in, but for the election day, I'm going to have I've got a second room here, and I'm creating like a secondary studio room here for the election day. So I'm just setting up like
you're doing live coverage?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to derail you, dude. Go ahead. No, you were talking about democracy.
Yeah, I think that what a democracy is and what it's for is actually, I think that's actually a really complicated question. Like, for instance, in a democracy, let's say that you have 90% of ethnicity A and 10% of ethnicity B. Should ethnicity A be able to vote should they be able to vote to enslave ethnicity B, right? Some people would say that that's democracy, right? But then, I mean, obviously you've got that, I don't even know if Ben Franklin said it, but there's that quote of like two lambs and a wolf, or two wolves and a lamb, or whatever. Some people say,
fighting
well, no,
over what to have for dinner.
Yeah. Some people say, well, no, you need to protect the rights of minorities. That's actually more democratic. But is that really more democratic? That in a way, that's a bit of a tyranny of the minority. So some people might say that, like, well, minorities having an outsized like influence on the government by getting special protections is not fair. But then those same people, who maybe they're probably conservatives, would say things like the Electoral College or the Senate composition, that is fair, that states should have an outsized influence, not just population, but states. So I think that, like, I would disagree heavily that the idea that, like, what is democracy, that's like a super crystallized concept. I think they're still fighting to this day over what a democracy should be or what it looks like. I don't know if everybody.
Well, I think if you said a republic, I would agree with you. If you said what is a republic, I think that would be harder for the. I think that would kind of be a better descriptor for all of those things. Like in a republic, where people have the right to vote, are we going to protect minority rights, the rights of women? Are we going to protect this? Are we going to protect that? We have constitutional constraints, or what sort of republic do you want? But I think democracy itself is just basically people voting for a thing that they want. I mean, I don't really know what else it would be. Other than
let's say that we do a vote. Let's say there was a referendum in the next election on not only are you voting for the presidential candidate, we're voting to enslave the other half of the population. So whoever wins the popular vote gets to take the other half as slaves. Like, would you say that's democratic? And then yes or no, and then why?
Yeah. So that would be, I think that because a democracy can use democracy to vote democracy out doesn't make it less of a democracy. That's still that would still be the democratic process, right?
Yeah, but would what exists afterwards, would that still be democratic?
No, I don't think that would be. So, like I said, I think you can use democracy. So you could go to the people and you could say, how about you vote away your right to vote? Right? And they all go, okay, sure. And they do that. Well, now they have no more right to vote, right? But they use their right to vote to do it. Yeah, I mean, that would still be a democracy. I wouldn't see how that wouldn't be a democracy.
Sure, I guess I feel like what if you did have a right to re-vote on that every 4 years and you were just a slave for the 4 years while you were waiting for the next election?
Yeah.
There are ways that we can kind of like work around these, but I think at the end of the day, I really do think that what a democracy is, that's a very I feel like it's a very abstract concept. Like, I think at its root, democracy is really just saying that, like, the people. And that's like a very broad term. Even that, right? Are black people? How early you go in the U.S. do women count as people that vote? Or what about do non-citizens count as people? Democracy in the very broadest sense is like citizens having their will represented in the country through some form of ballot.
Yeah, I agree. It's just it's the idea that citizens have their will represented and can somehow participate. So I think that, like, the broadest, most charitable kind of definition I can give would be that as well. But I still think that that's still a very particular criteria that we can apply to things. When we're talking here about fascism, that doesn't seem so clear to me in this. It just seems kind of like if it's just an abstract concept, then anything that anybody does which could meet these potential two legs, I could just kind of call them a fascist. And I don't think that that's getting at the spirit of what you're saying.
I mean, you can. I mean, at the end of the day, a label is just a label. Ideally, it's like it's a jumping point for further conversation. But I mean, like, if you want to say that, then theoretically you could get more reductive. So, like, theoretically, there's a world where Stephen never calls somebody a fascist, but instead I just say, well, these people are actually they're ultranationalist hyper-authoritarians. And then you come in and you call me and you're like, hey, I want to talk to you about what ultranationalist means. And we could have this exact same conversation where you're like, okay, well, ultranationalists exist in this like culturally relative vacuum, and you shouldn't be saying ultranationalists. You should instead say X, Y, or Z or whatever. And then, right, it could get like reductive from there, right?
Yeah, well, and with that, again, I'll kind of just grant this as being true as well, because I think it is. The thing is, though, is in that case, I think if you were to run around and call people that you politically disagreed with a bunch of hyper-authoritarian ultra-nationalists, that people honestly wouldn't care that much. They'd be like, okay, well, that's somewhat nebulous meaning, this and that. But if you say fascist, that brings up all the loaded baggage which comes with the word fascist. And so that, I guess that's ultimately what I'm getting at, is that it seems to me like you want to, and I do this too, we all do this, right? So to be totally fair, but it seems like you're pummeling that label specifically because of the loaded baggage that it has associated with it, especially with Nazis, right? That's the purpose of it, rather than necessarily due to authoritarianism or trade agreements or tariffs or any of those types of things.
Yeah, and I think I said that earlier in the conversation, which is, I guess it's technically a little at ends what I said, where I'm like, people should divorce the normativity from their like economic labels or whatever.
Yeah, but
I mean,
rhetoric's rhetoric, right?
Yeah, but I mean, like when I'm saying somebody is fascist, I am trying to evoke. Same with if I call somebody a tanky or a socialist, I am trying to evoke some negative, like normative baggage there. That is the goal, because I don't think that like we shouldn't be okay. I mean, I would argue that we shouldn't be okay being hyper-nationalist authoritarians. Like we've seen what that looks like in the past, and I'm trying to evoke all of that feeling when I say that. Yeah, but I mean.
Okay, well, so I mean, Socrates said himself that rhetoric is anything which convinces external to logic. So whatever it is that is convincing for your worldview, that kind of sways people over to it, absent logic, you can kind of type up to rhetoric. I think that's what he meant by that. So I mean, at least I can kind of understand now a bit more the rationale if you're kind of with the admittance that, hey, yeah, you're right, it is somewhat nebulous, and it could be okay, these policies in other nations other than this, but this doesn't really conform to Americanism, and I'm using the label because it really puts a negative light on Trump. I mean,
yeah,
is that a fair
what you just
assessment?
said there, that is a much less of a bite, right? Much the same that if you're like expanding income retribution to such a level that it's hard to achieve economic prosperity as an individual in the United States is not good. It's easier to just call somebody a communist or a socialist, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason.
Yeah, well, and to bring the loaded rhetoric with it, right? Like, you commie, right? That's very helpful. I agree. But it does contend. It's a bit contentious with the idea, though, of, like you said, political normativity. So it doesn't seem like the purpose of it exactly is to necessarily fight against the idea of fascism, but more it's the idea to just kind of go after Trump because you don't like Trump, right?
Yeah, I guess to bring it back to 2 points I made. So one point I said earlier that there's tension between now is I said earlier when people discuss like these particular perspectives, they should be it should be dispassionate and unnormatively loaded, right? An authoritarian is an authoritarian, a democracy is democracy. It's not necessarily good or bad. It just depends, right? On other values. When I'm in like debating when I'm debating something over somebody being better or worse, and then I think that you start to bake in more normativity when you're making statements. Like if I'm arguing against somebody and I'm bringing up the point, this guy wants to do this. Like even if that was a purely logical statement, right? If I were to say Kamala wants to increase taxes on the top 1% to 99%, right? In that statement, even if it's not there explicitly, there's normativity baked into it. I'm arguing against her and I just brought up a policy, it's probably bad, right? Yeah. Like if I was arguing with somebody and they were like, talk to me, you don't like Trump, like tell me about Trump. And I'm like, Donald Trump had a rich father. Your assumption, like you would hear that as me saying, Donald Trump having a rich father is bad. And then if you were to say, well, wait, what's wrong with that? And I go, oh, nothing. I'm just like stating a fact about Trump. You'd be like, what the fuck? What do you mean you're stating a fact about Trump? Because we don't parse the language like a machine, right? We're in the context of the conversation. So going back to, when I say analyze things like non-normatively, I'm talking about for like jerk off, like policy discussion, basically. But now to bring this back to the other point that's kind of in tension with Vosh, when I said, why are you calling Scalia or Bush a fascist? The issue that I had there is that I didn't care so much that he was calling them a fascist. What I cared about is that if we were to have a discussion on why he's calling them a fascist, he wouldn't be able to back that up. He wouldn't be able to justify that. That was my big issue. Like you can't just be that he's a fascist.
But aren't you at the same mercy of that? Like when you say Trump's a fascist, you also have to back that up. And if it's just kind of this well, there's these two pillars which I think all fascists have in common. I think even like third positionists would agree that those two pillars could exist. But then if you say, from a cultural relative or cultural pluralist position, I can see why other countries do that, and I don't even actually have a problem with it just here. You would kind of be at the same mercy Vosh was at, wouldn't you?
I don't think so, because I think that the conversation that you're talking about right now, and I'm just reiterating this for you and the audience because it sounds like I'm attacking, but I'm not. The discussion we would have would be one of semantics, where we'd be saying, like, well, what do we mean when we say fascist? But the conversation that I would be debating Vosh on would be one of substance, where Vosh would say, well, no, so what Scalia is doing is ahistorical. It's like way too far away from what America should be. Like, we would have a debate on the substance of what does it mean to have American values and what does it mean to rule in ways that are congruent congruent with American tradition. And I think that's what the debate would be, not just over whether or not I agree with his particular definition of fascism, right? Like if I had a debate, like if we were debating and we didn't,
wouldn't you guys have to agree?
And you were to say, what?
Well, wouldn't you guys have to agree on what that meant to even have that substantive debate?
We could, but if Vosh were to just say, it would really depend on the conversation. But like this would be the same with you and me. If Vosh were to say, well, when I say fascist, I just mean he's conservative, then I would say, oh, well, I think that's a dumb way to define fascist. But okay, I probably agree with you, but that's just a dumb way to define it. Then we would have a semantics debate. But I think with Vosh, we would disagree on substance, I think.
Mm-hmm. Rather than the semantics. Okay, I think I understand that as well. Okay, well, I think we got a lot of that cleared up. Then a couple of questions I have for you since we're in the room. The first one is, what did you think of the Jubilee thing?
It's what I'm used to at this point. It's kind of wild, kind of wacky.
It was bizarre, wasn't it? Am I wrong, or was it bizarre? It was strange.
I mean, I feel like at this point I'm kind of used to crazy, wacky people, but it was pretty. Yeah, like the two things I didn't like were, I can say I don't like the personal attacks, but it's just like, it's kind of weird or whatever. But the thing that I didn't like the most was somebody would sit down, and I had actually talked about this on stream before. It's like, I'm not going to let people just gish gallop and then get voted off and not respond. So I was trying to cut people off a little bit more. I think even in our conversation, I was trying to be a bit more like cutting you off or be aggressive because I didn't want you to say something,
Sure.
get voted off, and then I can't respond. But the thing is that some people, what they do is they would sit down and they would do like this whole rant at me, and then they would just get up before even being voted off. And I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah, okay. So the next day after this was done, I was on stream because people were asking me about it.
Uh-huh.
And just so you know, I don't know if you know this or not, and I want to know if you think that this is cheating, because this bothers me when progressives do this, right? But if people had an entire group put together of people who knew that they were going to debate you, and they all went in a group and they all assessed all of your talking points in order to collaborate for who's going to go when, who's going to say what, is that cheating to you? Do you consider that cheating?
So I'm going to be a huge outlier here. And I would say that in almost all circumstances, I would say probably, yeah, maybe it's not in the spirit of it. I would say that for me,
it's not in the spirit, right?
Yeah, it's not in the spirit.
For sure.
I would say for me personally, I want people to come with their strongest whatever. So if you think that like stacking the deck against me by having better people come up to debate points, I'm actually okay with that. But I would say that in most cases, that's probably cheating. Yeah, that's why I got in trouble.
Well,
with the
that's
producer.
not what the idea is. The idea is to choreograph. When this argument's made, then that's when you move away, and that's when the next one comes up and hits you with this or this or this. That's, I think, beyond what you're talking about, which isn't just, here's Destiny's arguments. Make sure you have good arguments when you show up. That's fine, right? Neither one of us would disagree. That's fine. Mm-hmm. But isn't the other, how's it in the spirit of it, man? It just seems like it's such slimeball behavior to me.
Yeah, I would argue that like if you came and you knew, because I leaked the prompts beforehand, which the producer got mad at me for doing. But my goal was that like, well, listen, people have good arguments, fucking bring them. Why not?
They told us the prompts beforehand, the producers.
When?
They gave us a list of what it was that your positions are going to be.
Wait,
or what your prompts were going to be.
Wait, when?
I think. Well, so I wasn't even supposed to be there, right? So I was out in Santa Barbara. I was shooting a whatever episode, and I got a call. Hey, if you're in the area, you want to come over and do this? And I said, yeah. And they didn't tell us who it was, but it was very obvious. It was clearly obvious that it was probably going to be you. But they did give us a listing of the prompts, of what the prompts were going to be.
Or I'm asking, did they give you this like the day of, or was it released beforehand?
It was released beforehand to us.
Oh, weird. Okay, because when I went over them on stream, they emailed me and they were like, "Hey, like, don't leak this. Like, we're not supposed to tell anybody." And I was like, "Oh shit, I didn't realize that." Maybe I misinterpreted that. Maybe they just didn't want it leaked for the public then, and not for other participants.
Yeah, for us, we signed an NDA to not leak those. Mm-hmm. So it's possible that it was just supposed to be for the group, which I think that's fine. Like, we need to know what the hell we're debating, right?
Yeah, okay.
But I think it's a very different thing if there's like a collaboration. Because these groups know each other, and I don't know, it just seems slimy to me, that's all.
Sure. It would have been better if they were less like unhinged statements, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, well, they just became shouting matches. Shouting matches.
I don't even mind shouting matches, but I feel like just like the one guy coming up and asking me like, what's the penal code for the law? Or like the one guy that came up and he was like, can you say that MAGA wouldn't, actually, this is an Andrew argument, but when the guy came up and he was like, would you say that, how can you say that MAGA wouldn't exist without disinformation? I was like, well, I mean, technically, I can't actually know that. Like, we're supposed to, you were there, you were sitting there, where she was like, I need you to make this prompt more spicy, or she was telling me to make like the most divisive prompt. I was like, okay, yeah, let's do this one. And I was like, well, no, I can't say would this definitively exist or not exist in all possible worlds. There's no way I could know that. And the guy's like, okay, I win. That Mika guy, like, okay, well, but. You know.
Oh yeah, that guy. You were like, well, yeah, if this was philosophy 101, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
That was. But the truth is because I was sitting behind the speaker, I couldn't hear a lot of what those guys were saying. Like, I actually couldn't hear it. From your perspective, you probably heard them fine.
Yeah.
But for the audience, it was actually very difficult to hear what a lot of those guys said. So when I rewatched it today, I was like, oh, that's what that guy said. I couldn't hear half of it. But anyway, yeah, I just wanted to get your take on that and see what you thought about the Jubilee thing. I think that it's. I think it's sneaky to have like a coordination like that. Personally, I did. Like, if it was a conservative in the chair, I would have called foul.
Sure.
That's all.
Well,
So
just conservatives cheating again. Nothing new.
It sometimes it doesn't pay to be charitable, right?
True.
I mean, I'm admitting there's that was a bit snaky, but I wasn't gonna participate in those groups anyway. But anyway, I appreciated the convo. Was there anything else you want to go over while I'm here? Since you're just around the computer anyway.
Well, I mean, not unless you can think of anything. I'm just building my studio.
Well, yeah, there's a couple other things that I wouldn't mind diving into. So we dove in to the idea of what's going to happen this coming election a little bit, but not much. Tim Pool has had multiple people on now who are predicting civil unrest post-election, regardless of the outcome, regardless of if it's Kamala or it's Trump. What do you think there? Do you think that there's a good possibility of this at this point?
I think that I feel like it's impossible to predict what's going to happen at any given point right now in the American election system. There's just like, we're moving in such a new environment, and it's like everything is so, like, we can't look to history to try to map on like what we think will happen. I have no idea. Like, I've said the same about, like, people ask me, like, if Trump becomes president, what'll happen? Like, I fully believe that there is a world where Donald Trump becomes president and becomes like the most hyper authoritarian, fascist, whatever dictator in the world, and destroys American democracy. And I think there's a world where Trump becomes president and he's just like, F you, I got elected, I told you I could, like, eat shit, and he like resigns or just does nothing for 4 years except like jerk off in the White House. Like, I think both of those could happen. I truly have no idea. Like, I don't think that the problem too is that, like, the question, it's begging a lot of precondition. Something I've noticed at the media, it happens in the media, is people will like foment the conditions for a feeling to be there, and then when the feeling is there, they'll like cite the feeling like it's novel. So somebody will say something like, I'll give an example of both sides for fairness. Somebody will say something like, cops kill black people all the time. It's just like an epidemic in society. And then everybody will feel like, oh my God, cops are killing black people all the time. And then a conservative will say, well, hold on. It's like not happening anywhere near as much as you guys think it is. It's like 10 unarmed black people a year, not like 10,000. And then someone will say, okay, well, but look, people have these feelings, so there must be something wrong. And I was like, okay, well, people have the feelings because you said the thing, right? And I would make the same dialogue tree argument for election fraud. People feel like something happened with the election. Well, of course, you've told them that for 4 years. Of course they have that feeling. So when somebody says, like, is there going to be civil unrest? I feel like a lot of it is going to come down to what happens leading up to the election or on the election. So if people keep saying that, like, ballot boxes are going to be rigged or something is going to happen, and then, an election turns out a certain way.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, you mean?
Exactly, yes.
Basically?
Yeah, it literally is, yeah. You're manufacturing, like, pre the event, like, the feelings that people are going to have, and then acting surprised when people have the feelings.
Well, I was thinking there's a great argument that I often use, and I'll kind of use it here to see what you think about it. The idea of a third party ever becoming emergent, I think, is actually silly. So when I look at other countries that have any type of republic setting or democracy setting, there's always two main parties, just like here. And I think that the reason that this occurs is because individually, people don't have very much political power. They basically don't have any. They only have political power if we collectivize as blocks. We basically have to do this in order to move any agenda forward we want. Even at the local level, we have to do this. So I think we're essentially stuck with two parties, because if one party consolidates enough influence to actually push an agenda, then people who don't like it will have to then collectivize in equal numbers to oppose that agenda. So I don't think there's actually any way out of the two-party system. So I think we're stuck with polarization until breakdown, Destiny.
I mean, maybe, yeah. I mean, like, I think there's a whole bunch of like statistical artifacts, I don't know if you call them, that make it as well that we have to be two parties. Like, the spoiler effect is a big one. Let's say that I slightly disagree with Trump or I slightly disagree with Kamala, and I make my own party. All I'm doing is entrenching the power on the other side, because now I've split the vote on my side with people that would hopefully agree with me more than the other people. So that's an issue. First past the post is arguably an issue, although every voting system has problems. Our Congress is arguably an issue because we don't have a parliamentary system. Like, I don't know, yeah. I don't necessarily.
But even in those systems, it usually just comes down to one party which has enough influence that if another party wants to oppose it, they have to collectivize in significant enough numbers to do so. And so it just kind of always ends up being this two-party thing over and over again. It kind of makes sense why.
Yeah,
because you have to have enough of a block to oppose something, right?
Yeah, but I think that one of the nice things about, I hate that I'm saying this fucking Huey guy convinced me a little bit. One of the nice things about having more than two parties, even if we had like a four-party system in the United States, I think it would be greatly improved, because a four-party system would cause each of the two main parties to change a little bit so that they don't lose too much. So, like, let's say, for instance, let's say you thought Kamala was too far left, or there are a lot of people right now, maybe not you included, but there are a lot of people that might not be happy with Trump, but honestly, like, you might not like Trump, but you might even think that Trump, the insurrection was real and all that, but voting for a far left government, voting for Kamala, it's a tall order for like a principally conservative person. That's a really hard thing to do. So, but if there was a second conservative party to vote for, there's two good things that happen. One, you can still vote conservative, but you don't have to buy into the crazy conservative guy if you don't like him. But also, two, it might moderate the view of that crazy conservative guy a little bit, because now you'll lose a ton of people to the other conservative party. Same thing on the left. If there are two left parties, right? If you feel like your person's going too far left, well, they've got your vote no matter what, because you're not voting conservative, not in the United States. But if there's a second left party, it gives people another option, and it forces people to moderate a bit. I feel like having four parties would help a lot, but who knows? Maybe we run into it.
It could, but I guess the argument that I would make against this is if you take a single issue like abortion, one side literally thinks you're murdering babies, and the other one thinks that they're lunatics, right? It's actually pretty simple, right? One side literally believes you're murdering children, the other side thinks you're not. It's right. It's like it breaks down to this. If one side gathers enough influence to then say, okay, we're going to push the agenda through to murder babies, then that's the rhetoric from the other side, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then it seems to me that necessarily everybody who doesn't want to see babies murdered are going to then collectivize in order to oppose this party that believes in baby murder. Right. So I don't see a way around it, because they would have to have enough influence to stop that agenda, which means it would have to equalize. Right. So it would have to be at least 1-to-1.
Sure. I think that the challenge for people when they think about government is there is no like catch-all, like this is the best system that solves for every problem. I think probably the beauty or the niceness of the American system is that it seems to have been able to incorporate a huge diverse set of viewpoints, and somehow we all function as the same government. Through like a dispersion of power, through different states, through different bodies of checks and balances, through the insurements of some rights and others. Like, but that's just like part of our ongoing. That's part of our like. It's just part of the thing, right? Like the problem that you're talking about there. There's no. I don't think there's like a solution for.
I don't think there is. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there is. And so when I talk to the third party voters, I think at the local level it can be done. Right? Very local level, by the way. I'm not even talking at the state level, because that seems to be influenced by federal politics as well. But at your very local level, I think that you could possibly have a breakdown this way. But I don't see how it can be done at the national level, because a single issue that a party proposes that has enough support would have to have enough support on the other side in order to smack it down. So it's going to collectivize the power in the hands of a couple of blocks. I just really don't see a way around it.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues, something I used to talk about a lot, one of the biggest issues is we became, I guess you could argue there's a downside of globalism, or maybe a downside of actually the internet, is we became like a really big international or national community to where you can exert, that locally you can exert a high degree of influence, right? Like you have a much better chance of reaching an agreement with your wife than you do with your mayor, than you do with your governor, than you do with the president, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that the only thing that people are interested in right now, unfortunately, are the things that people have the least control over, right? Most people in the United States have a stronger opinion about AOC than they do about their local mayor. So like, what kind of world is that? Like, how do you get people to feel like they're empowered to advocate for change and to have like control over their local politics when they don't know anything about their local politics and they're just obsessed with the national level that probably doesn't even really affect them as much as they think it does. But that's a whole like cultural internet related issue, and I don't even know how you begin to address that, because nobody wants to see it.
I don't even know if it can be addressed. Right? Some of this, I think, is just a burning fire that has to burn itself out. There's nothing anybody can do about it at this point. There just really isn't much that can be done. So, like for instance, let me give you an example. You have seen that there are tons and tons of women who say that they're going to vote for Kamala Harris because she's a woman, right? I mean, and that's their right to do it, right? They can vote for her because she's a woman. But they get really upset if people say, well, then I'm not going to vote for her because she's a woman, even though this is essentially the same argument both ways, right? I'm going to do this based on this criteria. Well, then I'm not going to do it based on this criteria. But if that's all it takes to vote is just, you just are emotionally invested based on even the gender of the person, then I'm not so sure that this is a particularly solvable issue in that light.
You have to, again, sometimes the solution that we're looking for isn't necessarily like a quote unquote solution. What we're really just looking for is something that can hold the tension, right? Which I guess in an oddly poetic way is kind of like all of life, right? Like you're a composition of cells that are fighting to maintain their cellular structure inside of organelles, inside of organs, inside of a body that's fighting to maintain homeostasis against a chaotic outside world. And arguably like governments and everything are the same, right? You're just, how do you control the tension in a way that allows you to move forward with as many different people as possible without everybody breaking apart and killing themselves? But at the end of the day, that's all you can do is just finding the way to best contain that, right? And when there's too much tension, you get authoritarians, you get whatever, who have to like excise some of it. When there's too little tension because I guess you've just killed everybody, then usually these states fail for other reasons too. But that's all. At the end of the day, there's nothing that solves for every problem. It's just things that then contain the tension and make people happy enough.
Yeah. There's a lot of truth in that, though I think we come at it from very different angles. And then I guess last thing, and then I'll get out of your hair and let you get back to building your studio. Are you willing to put I'm willing to put a bet against you for $1,000 that Trump loses if you're willing to put up $1,000 that he wins?
My voting, that wouldn't make sense because I voted in favor of Kamala right now, so I would.
Right. Well, right. But this is the way we can predict what you think, who you think's going to win and who you think's going to lose.
I think Kamala's going to win. I think it's slightly in her favor, but I think she's going to win. So wouldn't I want to bet for Kamala?
Yeah, well, so I think Harris is going to win too.
Okay, well,
yeah, that's annoying to me to have to say, but I think that there's a better than average chance that she's going to.
If you want them, so like I could give you, I can't do it in my head. I could give you 2-1, and I can say, fine, I'll put $1,000 on Trump, and if I win, you pay me $2,000, and if you win, I'll give you $1,000. I think
a double or nothing.
Well, we would have, if we both think that Kamala is going to win, then the only way that I would vote Trump is if you give me odds, right?
Yeah, I'll give you 2-1.
Sure. Or you could match that better, maybe 1.5 to 1. I don't know what the current markets are, but.
Yeah, we'll just do a 2-1. So if Trump loses, you're paying out $2,000, and if Trump wins, I'm paying out $1,000. Is that correct?
If Trump loses, I'm
paying out $2,000. You're paying out $1,000.
Yeah, it would be that. Yeah, sure. Yeah. If you want, we can.
All right.
Well, hold on.
Okay.
The only thing we would have to qualify, unfortunately, is what does it mean to win or lose?
Oh yeah. I didn't think about that. Oh.
Because what if it is the case that what if somebody wins, and because let's say somebody wins and they manage to block the vote in the House, and then somebody doesn't become president, then did it count? Or what if somebody wins, but then let's say Trump or Kamala argues with the governors and they change their elector votes? How about this? If it's an ordinary process with no significant disruptions.
If it's without significant aberrations.
Sure.
So
like January 6th wouldn't count as a significant, like a delaying of the certification of the vote wouldn't count, but like a change in elector votes after the certification date or something.
That's going to count.
Sure.
Yeah, that's going to count. All right. We got a 2-1. Sounds good, Destiny. I'll let you get out of here. Have a good one.
Okay, have fun. Be careful.
All right, take care.